What does it mean to have an extended family that spans continents, cultures, and backgrounds? In a world that often emphasizes individualism and is becoming increasingly divisive, the idea of a network of connections and shared values reminds us of the depth and richness that comes from building relationships across borders. Today, I get to explore how meaningful conversations and genuine connections form the backbone of an extended family. My guest, Brandon E. Campbell, has dedicated himself to creating these connections through Extended Family, a platform that redefines the way we engage with the world, encouraging us all to connect not just as travelers, but as global citizens with a shared responsibility to repair, uplift, and contribute.
What is my relationship as a contributor of humanity? What is my relationship with progress? What is my relationship with repair? How do we move those forward collectively? How do those contribute towards liberation? What does liberation mean? And why is it actually something super important, practical, and not something that's pigeonholed to a revolutionary textbook? Liberation is a collective journey. We're all progressing in humanity, and we're all evolving from stories and narratives.
In this episode, Brandon and I discuss the journey of building a global community, the value of empathy in connecting across cultures, the challenges and rewards of living a nomadic life, and the responsibility of global citizenship. We dive into the power of meaningful conversations and how each interaction can shape our understanding of belonging, identity, and collective progress. I hope you enjoyed the episode.
What's up? I'm Brandon with Extended Family, and I'm excited to be with the Qonnect.
Brandon, so we're here in Nairobi. We're at the Semabox Studios. And usually when I do these interviews, I start off with a question that sort of grounds us, like brings us to center and to focus. And so I just wanted to ask you, what are you feeling a lot of lately?
Ooh, what are you feeling a lot of lately? That's a great question. I'd say I'm feeling reflective, and strategic.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So like we're focused.
Yes. Well, I think it's incredibly important to always be self-reflective, right? I think now, we're in the fourth quarter of 2024. The year is coming to a close. We have so much to look back on what we've accomplished, our trial and error, our triumphs and mistakes.
Right.
So I think it's apropos for this moment, but I think that's also just something that I usually exist in a state of reflection, but strategic because not only because it's the fourth quarter, but because it's we have different stages that are pivotal, right, in our lives. And at the point that I am currently, it feels like a intensely like strategic problem solving, figure it out, moment. So
yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's really interesting. And I would also assume with like building something, building your tech platform that we'll like get into and things like that, you have to sort of get into the space where you're problem solving and you're thinking ahead and stuff like that. But also just like life outside of work, being reflective of how far you've come and where you're going and things like that.
Absolutely.
So I resonate with that. And you're, for the people watching.
Yes.
You're from Las Vegas, Nevada.
Yes.
So it's not lost on me that you've been to a lot of different countries and you've traveled quite extensively. And tell me about how the kid from Nevada ends up, going on this adventure all around the world.
That's so interesting.
And how that came to be.
Absolutely. Well, I was born and raised in Las Vegas, Nevada. My parents were both in the Air Force. They met in Grand Forks. It's so funny. I'm really bad at my geography sometimes, especially between North Dakota and South Dakota. But I think Grand Forks is in North Dakota.
Okay.
But they were there. They were stationed there. My mom's from Dallas, Texas. My dad's from Plainfield, New Jersey.
Okay.
And they met there. and got married and moved. Were stationed at Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how we got to Las Vegas. They went on to become in public servants in law enforcement and the fire service. But I was born and raised in Las Vegas. And it's so funny because the number one question that I always get or the comment is, there's two things actually. One is, I didn't know people were actually from there.
Okay.
All right. And then two, the second comment is, wow, you're the first person I met, from Las Vegas.
Yeah.
And then the third crazy one that I used to always get is, do people live in the hotels and casinos? Now, back then, that was a crazy question. It's not so crazy now because as development has like progressed and evolved, you actually now have residences in some of these newer hotels and casinos. But back then it was, a preposterous question. You know what I mean? Like, or thought that somebody would do that. But I start with that foundation because it's incredibly important. And I like to say that my path was one of always seeking to find what's best within myself. Exposing myself to different environments to sharpen the mold of whatever I was becoming. And so as an adolescent, as a person that was seeking, I guess, higher education, feeling as though that was the pathway, right? We were always told from the U.S. perspective that, hey, you go to college, that's your pathway towards success and stability.
Yeah.
So for me, with my context at the time, it was, I want to go as far away from home as possible. And it's laughable now, but as far away from home as possible for me just meant to the other side of the country.
Yeah.
Right.
And I would assume for a lot of Americans that might be the case as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would be interested to actually talk to some people who are of like high school age now and see what their perspective is.
Yeah.
But at the time for me, that just meant, I'm going to go to Maryland or Virginia or something of that nature.
Yeah.
The other coast. And so I attended Hampton University for undergrad. And then after undergrad, during the undergrad, I went through a process of, okay, I need to do something that is meaningful to me. I didn't know anyone who had done anything that they were passionate about. So at the time, that meant, I love this media entertainment space. Mm-hmm. These are things that are with my context at the time, not having been exposed to maybe a finance world or a tech at that time. I was like, well, I need to do something that's exciting for me. Mm-hmm. I moved to Atlanta. Then after a few years there, and I'm getting to the answer, but I'm just kind of taking you on a journey.
Yeah, of course.
It was, okay, now I'm here. Mm-hmm. What are the places that metropolitan areas in the States that are known for having the best of the best or sharpening you to help you kind of become your best?
Yeah.
And those two places where it was between LA and New York.
Mm-hmm.
And so I positioned myself to move to New York because I was like, wow, you hear, like, it's so funny how even geographic locations have their own marketing, right?
Yeah.
Like, I guess the marketing tagline for New York is, if you can make it here, you can make it everywhere, right? And that's you hear that all the time, but that's the energy, that's what you feel. And so as a person who had been there maybe briefly, but hadn't experienced it, that was my focus. Mm-hmm. And then I also actually at a young age in my 20s was like, yeah, but I probably won't raise a family there. So I'll go to New York first before I go to LA. Like, it was that strategic. So it was New York. Mm-hmm. So I moved to New York, started law school in Atlanta, moved to New York, did a visiting semester there for my final semester because I knew that's where I wanted to move.
Yeah.
Stayed there, took the bar there and in New Jersey to be kind of settled in that region. And after a couple of years, it was okay, but I don't have a global perspective. Mm-hmm. And what is the practical way for me to gain that global perspective? And that was a question that I didn't have the answer for at the time.
Yeah.
And as serendipity would have it, sometimes, our manifestations are both vocal and sometimes subconscious.
Yeah.
Right? And a friend sent me a text or sent the group chat a text.
Yeah.
Was like, oh, hey, this is a cool little thing. And at the time, it seemed crazy because I was basically my second full year as an attorney.
Yeah.
And my second year, it was probably my third, but it was my second year of having a position that felt like I'm finally, on my pathway.
Yeah.
And for an attorney that was just starting out, it was something that, anyone that was similarly positioned would have been happy to have. I'll just say it, that way.
Yeah.
And for me, I always knew that wasn't the end goal, that my study of the law or my journey as a lawyer was a tool and a pathway, a tool set, you know what I mean, on the building blocks of me becoming the best person I needed to be to solve whatever problem or serve the purpose that I felt like I had been put on earth for.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, I was like, yeah, this is cool, but this isn't it.
Yeah.
So, great this is a podcast because I am long-winded. No.
I love a good conversation. So all of the different directions you want to go, let's go.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so with that, the text that he sent me was an opportunity for a program to travel for a year. And at the time it was new. It was called Remote Year. Mm-hmm. The idea was that you travel for 4 to 5 weeks at a time and experience different cities and different countries around the world with a cohort of people. And for me, at first, while it seemed like kind of outlandish, it quickly became, as I was, kind of thinking on it and like pondering on the possibilities. Is this possible? Does it make sense? You call those people that are close to you. And it was like, wait, it went from there's no way I can do this to there's no way I cannot do this.
Right.
And I ended up participating in that program, and it changed not only the way that experience of experiencing different countries for that year changed, not only the way that I viewed the world, but that I viewed what was possible pretty immediately.
Mm.
Yeah.
So you said that you didn't have this global perspective.
Yes.
And you go on this journey, or you start this journey, and you're visiting all of these places. And how many years has it been since you started Remote Year till now?
Yeah, so that was 2017 in March.
Okay, so just over 7 years.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So how has that shaped your worldview? How has it impacted it?
Right. Well, since that time, I think this is important context for your question, is that since that time, I've been on and off, been living and working remotely in a similar ways. Obviously, it was a year consecutively, came back, stayed stationary for a little bit and planned to leave again in 2020. And then obviously we had COVID.
Yeah.
So came back, I think I traveled once more that year. Was pretty stationary and
came back. You mean you went back to?
I went back to New York. I was living in New York at the time.
Okay, so going back to New York, you're there for a while.
Yes.
And then COVID happens.
Then COVID happens. COVID happens. When I first returned, there was a big kind of tug of war internally.
Yeah.
Right, trying to reconcile the life that you spent your life creating to this metamorphosis that you've now experienced and trying to fit your new self into your old life, right? It's like a butterfly trying to live a caterpillar's life.
Yeah, not gonna happen.
So that, I think that was important. And so during that time, I was like, okay, how do I make this make sense? I had my own practice for some time because that was what allowed me to remain remote and continue to do work as well as experience, explore, learn, and gather information in the world in the way that I was intentionally doing for a purpose, not just because I wanted to live a untethered life. It was because I knew that what I wanted to do was meaningful. And actually, this is important context. Extended Family started as a conversation series during that initial year. Mm-hmm. And the idea was, while I'm broadening my horizons, others would be able to broaden theirs. And let's take this journey together type situation. Yeah. But to continue answering your question, since that initial year, in 2021, I started traveling again. After we got the go ahead that, it was all cool to travel.
Yeah.
I started re-engaging, dipped my toe in the water, making bigger leaps again. Because I always said if I had an opportunity to do the experience again, that I'd do it on the continent of Africa, right?
Okay.
And I was like, okay, I want to explore different countries in Africa as an African person, right? As an African American, because of our specific history, we don't have generally an experience where we get to engage meaningfully with the continent, right? And so I was like, I want to do that for myself. So in 2022, I took a similar journey, a little bit longer in each place, somewhere between 6 and 12 weeks in 7 countries over the year. And then I've been living and working remotely pretty consistently since the end of 2021, including Africa and Asia. So now, your question, I believe, was how has that shaped
your global
my
outlook?
worldview?
Yeah.
I think,
of course, in comparison to before you began the remote year journey.
And I think the answer is that there's just so much power in perspective.
Yeah.
Right? And what that allowed me to do is gain experience and context that shape perspective, shape my perspective, but also give you more insight to what others are experiencing. And then amplify, I think, the level of empathy with which you're able to engage or just have an everyday conversation, right? I think exposure is such a catalyst, to not only ignorance, but to kind of enlightenment or being open-minded about certain things. And I think it contributes so much. It's not just a kumbaya, feel-good situation. It's something that can contribute directly to how we experience life socially, economically, politically, contributes to how we do business. And so to answer your question, how has it shaped it? I think it's broadened it tremendously. It's made it more dynamic, and it's given me a deeper trough of information and experiences to draw upon to have more positive experiences in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you had mentioned extended family, which is the platform that you had started by just recording conversations that you would meet, that you would have with people that you met throughout your travels.
Right.
And so when you first began, you said you just wanted it to be something that everyone experienced together, you're learning and everyone can learn along with you. But as you've sort of also gone through your own personal transformation, how has that initial, I guess, goal or objective for extended family also evolved? Because today it's not just conversations that you're having with people. It's become so much more than that.
Absolutely. So in that initial year, it was a pathway towards broadening that perspective, right? I said I didn't have global perspective. And I was like, okay, well, how do I actively do this? What practical ways when we have objectives? We were like, okay, what's the practical way that we make this happen? I could travel to these countries and I could just sit in the bubble of my cohort and experience each other. And I would have seen it, but how do I actually experience it? How do I meet people? How do I better understand? And we're all limited. We all have limited time, right? Time is our most precious resource, right? An asset. And but we're like, okay, how do I utilize the time we have? And just to keep in mind, we're working full time, right? We're still working full time. So it wasn't like a sabbatical. It wasn't like, hey, we'll just have a year to frolic. It was, we're going to live and work remotely. And in the time zone that we're working, in the time zone that we're living in, we're still working on whatever respective time zone that, we worked from. So we had people from India, Australia, Europe, and people from the States, Canada, Mexico.
Yeah.
And so everyone is figuring out what makes sense for them. That context, I think, is just important for your question. So how it evolved was initially, it was like, okay, my practical tool to achieve my objective is let's have conversations with local people in every place that we go to. As much as possible, getting at least 2 or 3 perspectives, right? Trying to balance not only the male, female perspective, but the intergenerational perspective, cultures that people didn't know were in that particular place, right? Had one conversation with a young lady who was Thai, but she grew up in Czech. You know what I mean? I had a conversation with a gentleman who had an incredible journey. He was Ghanaian, but he was living in Prague. You know what I mean? So it was trying to not only get what you would typically identify as a person from this place, but the things that would also surprise, a person engaging with that place for the first time. And so it started as exposure, and then it was like, hey, this actually can be so much more powerful than even maybe I anticipated.
Yeah.
And so pretty quickly, I think a month 7 or 8, I was like, I think this is much more than a conversation series. I think this can be a much bigger community. And did I answer your question?
No, yeah, you're heading in that direction.
Yeah.
I mean, my question was around the evolution of extended family and how your personal, evolution influenced its own evolution, right?
For sure.
And so, extended family, you realize that it's become so much, it can be so much more powerful.
Yes.
And then, I mean, of course, you travel back to New York, you come back, you continue to record all of these conversations and travel and live in places for, you said, at this time up to 3 months,
Yes.
12 weeks, you said.
Because that's typically what our visas allow, is the maximum.
Oh, yeah. It is 3 months, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, fair. Immigration laws.
Yeah.
But then how do you then move from, okay, I'm just going to have one interaction at a time, which is what you say on like your bios, on your social media pages, and it's going to then become a tech platform.
Absolutely.
Where does that happen?
Yeah. So it's so funny. Sometimes people say things and you're just like, oh, I want to touch on that real quick. Sometimes I feel like a politician, right? I think, where it's super, I guess, appropriate for the moment because we're in, at least in the States, like this huge election cycle. And I just got done this morning looking at like different things and how people like answer questions. It's so interesting. But you said one interaction at a time.
Yeah.
And I wanted to touch on that briefly because I think that's so important. The only way we can engage, right, is in our present moments. And so that line, one conversation at a time, one interaction at a time, is an acknowledgement that not only that our moments are precious, but that's the only way we can make progress. We can only make progress in any moment in which we choose to engage with whatever situation we're in, whether it be business or, again, interpersonal like exchange. It's in that moment where we have an opportunity to make a choice to make progress.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, the transition.
Sorry, now you said something.
Okay.
No, but I think that what I've always really appreciated about like conversations is that I think if we're going to grow and if we're going to learn, then we also have to enter spaces or conversations or interactions that are different from the ones that we're used to.
Absolutely.
And sometimes that also includes getting a bit uncomfortable,
Absolutely.
And so I guess you decided on having conversations with people. You could have gone about it a whole other way and like document people and like what they do in their country. And you could have taken that route.
For sure.
But you chose to sit down with people and have that one-on-one time. And I would assume that has to do with, wanting a deeper connection, because like we've all watched documentaries about places we've never been to.
Yes.
But it doesn't hit the same as when people that are different from one another are sitting down and having exchanges about where they're from and how they grew up and what their ideologies are and things like that.
For sure. Well, I think it's interesting. The approach was actually a lot more practical than that. It was, I work about 12 hours a day, and it was like, I'm also traveling. What's the most practical way for me to learn about this place? I want to meet people and I want to engage, but I also want to learn. And so I utilize those conversations not only to learn about that place through their lived experience, but also to give me a foundation for the research that I would dive deeper into, right? Yeah. So you might go on tours or something like that, and that would give me kind of the foundation to be like, okay, this is what I know, and then I would ask that person about it and how it, contextualized the lived experience. Yeah. But I am a person that loves to engage, to learn. And as you mentioned, basically sitting down with someone, it requires you to get vulnerable. You utilize the word uncomfortable. And I'd say that discomfort, right, can be synonymous with friction. And friction is the direct pathway to progress, right? And everything you said is so interesting because it's the foundation of what now extended family is, which is a gathering space for people to engage more deeply in the world around them. And we utilize the vessel of travel because that's the easiest way to communicate or open minds to go to a new place, right? Even when we're going to a new place, whether it's like an idea, we are traveling to that place, right? To utilize like a euphemism, but travel itself, our physical bodies going to a new place, experiencing a new culture. Typically, a person is most open in those moments. So with extended family now, it's a travel community to explore the world more deeply around them. Yeah. And we do that in a myriad of ways by creating virtual and in-person experiences. But what we're really looking to do, like the key, the North Star vision is creating infrastructure, technical infrastructure that allows people to connect more meaningfully with similarly situated people around them. So for example, if you want to travel to Brazil or Japan, you can find someone that's similarly situated based on your interests and do so somewhat seamlessly. Okay. Another thing that you mentioned as I kind of close is you kind of touched on having that space where people feel comfortable enough to engage meaningfully. And that's entirely what extended family is about. Yeah. Anyone can build a tool that has the functional capability to do what we're doing. Yeah. But it's how do you get people to engage in a way where they feel comfortable and safe? Yeah. There's so much technology over, over the years that does many things, right? But sometimes I think we get into conversations about branding and marketing. Sure. And people think of it as just, it's just a thing. It's just a business thing. But what we're really talking about is how do you psychologically get someone to feel comfortable enough that they engage with this particular space with such intention that not only is it beneficial for the whole, but it's beneficial for themselves. Yeah. And so I guess this is maybe a slight segue into balancing, right, the human experience with a business approach. Yep. But I think that's where we live. Yeah.
So how do you go about, I guess, creating that sort of space where people can be honest and vulnerable, yes. Especially people that may not have the same or similar life experiences as yourself. And absolutely. Even sometimes English might not be their first language absolutely. The way it is for you. So how do you go about that?
I'm so glad you asked that question. Because when I first started on the journey of extended family, something that was incredibly clear for me is that no matter how intentional I am, no matter how much I try, no matter how vulnerable I am, I'm still one perspective, right? I may be a multifaceted, I might have, a multifaceted perspective. I might have a dynamic approach. I might, live in the intersection of different spaces. But there still is a limit to that. And so I always wanted to be clear that extended family was more about an idea and it wasn't about me as a person. So what I wanted to do and what we've accomplished and what we'll continue to work on is that we wanted to have, specifically with conversations, many different people having the experience of having those conversations, right? Because we understand that it's not about me, and one perspective doesn't speak for everyone else. And people experience things or are open to certain things through the lens of other individuals. To be more direct in my word salad, if someone comes from a Somali background, they're gonna have a little bit more weight potentially on how you kind of articulate an experience or your experience or how you experience the world than if myself as a non-Muslim, Christian raised American man. You know what I mean?
Right.
So yeah, I think it's, to put a bow on it, incredibly important that we're seeking, honestly, endless perspectives, because I think that power, and I think the word is kind of utilized very flippantly, but the power of diversity is literally like having an endless source of Avengers.
Yeah.
No, seriously. Think about it. You got all these people with superpower in their lived experience and their perspective. You have an opportunity to bring all these people together to solve the world's problems. Why wouldn't you take that opportunity?
I mean, a lot of people don't, though. A lot of people don't step into that. Because with it, I think also comes a level of responsibility.
Right.
Like, especially when it involves people, because you're building that rapport, you're building that trust, and maybe sometimes, I don't know, I wonder about it too. Like, if you have these skills and you're able to do these things, why wouldn't you build those bridges? Right. But it also, I guess to you, I would ask, because you also mentioned the American elections coming up and things like that. Yes, and I said earlier, we were not going to talk politics, which we're not.
I know.
But with all of these experiences and all of these different people that you're interacting with and the space that you're nurturing and growing in extended family, what do you then see the role of the global citizen or the responsibility that we hold as global citizens in what the world is today? Because it's very easy I love to travel. Travel has been part and parcel what has made me me. Grew up moving around quite a lot with my family. And so I think my approach to travel has always been having to interact with people of different cultures, really getting into it. My dad he spent a lot of time, like, throughout his 20s working on, like, ships, like being a navigator on a ship and things like that. So he's been all around the world. And so when we were traveling as a family and still do, he's very hard on, like, he doesn't want us to be very comfortable. And so we would take a very, like, road trips through Southern Africa and things like that, and, like, staying in small towns and, like, meeting people. And so that's always been what travel is to me.
Why didn't he want you to be comfortable, if you don't mind me asking?
I guess for him, there's a time for relaxation and there's a time to, like, be on an adventure. And for him, travel was always an adventure, And so I don't think that he was actively pushing us to be uncomfortable, but it's that we were never, like, in a resort, and we were always outside and in different towns and trying local cuisine and things like that. And so that's always been the way that I approach travel. But that's not necessarily everybody's sort of, I guess, method of travel as well. And I mean, I can open my social media now and, like, if I scroll, in the first 3 posts, there's something travel related, and places and histories and things like that just become sort of, unfortunately, a backdrop to, like, a pretty photo, a pretty video, which is fine because, like, we should all be having fun and we should all be exploring. However, I think we also sometimes can miss out on the humanity and miss out on the people that actually call that place home.
Absolutely.
Because in their experiences, we learn so much more about a place. We learn so much more through people. And that's something that I believe, which is also why I started this podcast and I write and things like that. But when you're going through all of these experiences and you're learning about politics and social issues and things like this all around the world, I would assume that you're also sometimes thinking about who Brandon is.
Absolutely.
In the world as a global citizen. So from what you're building and the journey that you've been on, how do you see what is the responsibility that we hold as global citizens?
I think that's a super important question.
Yeah.
And I think it starts with deference and reverence.
Mm-hmm.
You spoke about people missing a key point in the opportunity of travel. That's what I say. And that is the people in local communities. So I think one of the big problem, the big opportunity that we're looking for closing the gap on, just to reframe the language, is how do we change this idea of people going to places simply to experience them? And how do we make travel more than a person visiting a place? How do we create community in local communities around the world? What does that mean, right? How do we engage local communities such that they feel as though this is a space just as much as for anyone else for them to engage, right? It's not a one-way relationship, or it's not an extractive relationship. It's as we move more closely towards a globalized society, and we have people across socioeconomic statuses who have access to travel in different ways, how do we engage those people? So I think our responsibility, there's no one way to travel. You spoke about people may do it in different ways, right? That's why there's different categories of travel. Course. You spoke about your family and, your father focusing more on adventure, right? But you, having had that experience as a child, may grow up and be like, now I'm interested in the experiences that I never got to have. Now I'm interested in luxury, for instance. And so I say the only agreed upon foundation that I think should be a through line is deference and reverence to that specific place. And what that means is approaching any place that we travel with, okay, I don't have the context of their lived experiences. My context, my context, I should put it on the back burner as I approach this place. It won't always be easy. Sometimes it will be tough, and sometimes you'll get it wrong. Doesn't mean you're not allowed to have your own values. Doesn't mean you're not allowed to get frustrated. And you most likely will at times, but it's giving, right, that space to be like, I'm a visitor here. This isn't my home. And as such, when we're visiting any place, like we're visiting someone's house, we don't walk in someone's house and be like, hey man, take that pot off the stove. I don't like the pot like that. You know what I mean? Hey, you want me to take my shoes? I'm not taking my shoes off in the house. I
use that example all the time. You do? That when you're visiting a country, it's like going to someone's home, right? And so we do need to act accordingly. And some countries, there might be, different cultural practices that are not, your norm. And so you have to sort of like respect that and behave in a way that works in that society. Just like if someone says there's no shoes in my house, there's no shoes.
There's no shoes in the house.
Exactly.
And that's it.
Yeah.
And we could take that so many different ways, but I think it begins with that foundation. And I will, admit I've had my challenges at times. Because again, as you experience life more, although you understand that, you still have certain principles. No matter where you go, you're going to be Somali Muslim woman. You have your own principles, right? You have your own value sets. And when you approach that place, even though they might not be receptive to your values, you have to make a decision. Okay, how much am I going to give grace? Because that behavior is not acceptable in my culture.
Right.
And how much am I going to stand firm in my values? You know what I mean? So I think that's a balancing act that will never end.
Of course.
Yeah.
And I think that that's also just like growth in general. Like as we go through life, there's just the more that we learn about the world around us and we learn about ourselves, because as much as there's like us in the world, there's also us with ourselves, and we spend the most time with ourselves. And so as we go through all of that growth and learning, I think we tend to get better at that balance, I think. But of course, I think having those sorts of challenges is very human,
Absolutely.
Whether it's where you were born and raised and never left, or if you're in different places.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if it's where you're born and raised and you've never left, there's still so many dynamics, demographics, and cultures that contribute to that experience, right? And so, but we don't many times have the opportunity to have those vulnerable moments and intentional engagement that allows our perspective to broaden. We're talking about we're in an election cycle. The reason why people are so on so broad ends of the spectrum is because actually most of them don't have perspective on the other person's context, right? What is the context that makes up your belief and your value set? Why do you believe that? It's funny. This is so funny. I just had a conversation with a good friend last night, and we were talking about something. And, we were talking about solving a problem in their life. And I said, the problem, just on my observation and analysis from the information that they'd given me, is I was like, hey, it seems as though you're operating from different contexts. And you're experiencing friction because neither one of you have said, hey, what is the foundation from which you're operating that creates these expectations? Right? And here's my foundation. And if we have that agreed upon foundation, we don't have to we don't have to agree, but now I understand your context. And so when I'm experiencing something, I feel less emotionally charged because I understand your context, if that makes sense.
No, it does.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think that also at the very core of everyone, it doesn't matter what sort of like culture the person has come from or what language they may speak or how different they may be from you. There are certain very core things that every human goes through and experiences, emotions, life moments, things of that nature. And I think that through trying to understand someone, you kind of get to a point where you're just like, when you get real deep in there, we're not actually that different from one another. And I think that that's actually one of the most beautiful things about just the human experience is realizing that on top of it all, we're all different types of different. But really, when you get to foundational sort of core values, a lot of us are more alike than we are different.
Yeah. And yes, that's exactly right. It's funny. The tagline for Extended Family originally was finding what unites us in a time defined by what divides us. Basically, it was right when Trump was initially elected, right? 2017, right after he was inaugurated is when I initially left. And the kind of framing was there is more, the theory, right? Or the hypothesis was, there's more, we're more alike than we are different. And to oversimplify it, right? This is an oversimplification. But honestly, if you just think about it, it's because we're human, right? If you think about like any organism on this earth, it has certain characteristics. And although there might be, we have an ability to be, what do they call it? Sentient? Is that how they say it? Beings, right? Even though we have that ability.
Sentient beings?
Sentient. Oh, there we go. Satience is like protein. I'm thinking about like, I've been on my protein. Yeah. No. I'm not vegan, but protein is like satiating. I'm always hungry. I love food. And
love food. And
conversation
and food.
I know, right?
Top two.
And so I'm also, on a fitness journey. So you talk about like satiating things. Protein.
Okay.
So my bad. But sentient, yeah. So we're sentient beings. And so obviously what I was trying to say is while our range is such that there may be more variables than we think in other organisms, right? Because the way we can communicate and experience others.
Yeah.
Also, we just have, geographically, culturally, globally, skin tone, height, so many different things. Sometimes we can forget that,
absolutely,
hey, we are all human.
Yeah.
And because we're all human, very simply, we are more alike than we are different.
Yeah.
And I think that foundation, again, maybe an oversimplification, puts things in perspective. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which your point was, we have similar desires, needs, value sets, and there's just all nuance within that broader context.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm going to move us a bit forward and sort of change away from extended family and focus a bit on you. I mean, it's all been about you anyways, but how has this journey that you've been on for the past 7 years influenced your sense of identity? Because you did mention that, you came back to the continent and you wanted to spend more time. So you went to 7 countries, I think you said.
Yes.
And what was sort of your sense of identity before this journey, and where are you now? How has that evolved?
That's interesting. So I think the short answer is my sense of identity as like, a Black American or, an African American hasn't changed. I think, actually, I just did something interesting. So growing up, right, we thought the term Black American was the thing that we wanted to be called, because we felt like African American was respectability, like politics.
Okay.
Right? We thought it was a thing that basically white people would say when they were trying to be politically correct. You know what I mean? And so a lot of times I think, my social surroundings rejected like that term. It's like, well, why are you calling us that? You know what I mean? And it's so interesting that I feel a reclamation of the term and actually more grounded in utilizing it after the experience. So I think this is a pathway to answering your question. I think after my experience, it reminded me that but for like my existence on the continent, but for my ancestors' existence in the continent, we don't exist. And it sounds like so obvious, to maybe some people. And it was obvious even to me then, but just my relationship with that term completely changed, because it was like, no, I think it's important that as people who do not have, while we have a very strong culture in the United States and a very multifaceted and strong history and a contribution to the United States that cannot be removed from the existence, prominence, and power of the United States, that journey began on the continent and that we're African people. And so how my evolution of identity, that's one aspect of identity, but I think the other aspect of it is, what is my relationship with the world, right? What is my relationship as a contributor of humanity? What is my relationship with progress? What is my relationship with repair? How do we move those to forward collectively? How do those contribute towards liberation? What does liberation mean? And why is it actually something super important, practical, and not something that's, pigeonholed to a revolutionary textbook?
Right.
Why is it something that we all are on a pathway to experiencing cross-culturally? Although it may have a specific meaning to my journey as, an African American, liberation is a collective journey. We're all progressing in humanity, and we're all evolving from stories and narratives, all of us. And so I think my identity evolved in ways to ask those questions in ways that allowed me to take action for progress, and then also understanding that the world that we live in, the reality of the the reality of the world that we live in, and that some solutions call for different approaches, and that while who I am and what my value set is inextricably linked with extended family, that, okay, if I'm going to need to do something that I'm personally passionate about, then with all the context that I have in life, that pathway has to be a business approach.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so when you're in different places, are there certain places that you visited that you're surprised by how connected you might feel to that place? Have there been moments where you're like, wow, like I wasn't expecting this, but yeah.
That's
Can
so
you
funny.
give me an example of that?
I had an experience this year.
Okay.
It's a question that I've asked myself twice this year with Thailand.
Okay.
So I was there twice this year because we had a storyteller that was traveling around for a year. The reason that I did that is because to your earlier point of varying or differing perspectives, it was important that someone was able to experience someone's horizons broadening through their perspective, right? Because you have the ability, as we mentioned, to touch, a broader swath of people when you invite more perspectives and lived experiences.
And this is your chief storyteller.
Yes, that was the chief storyteller. Her name's Monica Gualani.
Yeah.
When I was in Thailand, closing out her experience, that was the last country she traveled to. The first time I was there at the beginning of the year, just personally. And then when I went to close out things with her, I was like, this is this feeling again. I just feel like things are clicking on all cylinders. And so I felt that then. I felt that the first time I ever came to the continent when I was in South Africa. I felt that actually here in Kenya in October. I felt that in Nigeria. And I felt that also in Colombia. And I also felt that in Japan. So there's different places where you feel it to varying degrees, and there's nuance, right? It's maybe I feel more productive here. I feel more at home here. I feel lighter here. So I have felt that, but it's interesting. I was wondering why that was the case. And then I recently learned about astrocartography.
Okay, what's that?
Have you heard about that?
No.
So a friend of mine that I actually met through travel in Senegal, she's a Delta flight attendant, and her name is Shadanis.
Okay.
And she was like, yeah, we were talking about it one day. I forgot how. And she was like, yeah, I do astrocartography. And I was like, what is that? And I think very roughly, it's the studying the alignment of basically your astrological birth chart with geography and how they intersect.
Okay.
And so when they can map out on a map and be like, hey, based on, who you are, where you were born, again, your chart,
what
sun, moon, rising,
born,
et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that you can identify like, hey, you may enjoy this place in this space in your life. You may enjoy this in this space of your life. And so that's not something I've dove super deep into, but, sometimes we utilize our lived experience and then the corroborating evidence to, as a vote of confidence towards or aware or something. You know what I mean? So it's like, although I haven't delved into that deeply, it was like, oh, it was something that was intriguing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
I understand like the feeling of like being in different places, and there's just parts of you that might resonate to a certain place more than another. And so, for me personally, being on the continent has always I feel very aligned.
Yeah.
Like I just feel grounded somehow. And I think that has to do with maybe a sense of belonging. And I've always sort of thought about, had I spent my formative years in Denmark, how different would my outlook and like my sense of belonging be? Denmark is a country of like 5.9 million people. That's tiny. And it's not as diverse. I mean, the capital city, Copenhagen, you'll see all types of people, but like you kind of go into smaller towns and it's incredibly white.
It's homogeneous, yeah.
Yeah. And so I always wonder what it would be like if we didn't move to Malawi when I was like 8 years old, and then growing up around people that, you know, are also African.
Yeah.
And so sort of when I've had these conversations, usually it is with people that might be from somewhere and are somewhere else and live cross-culturally. And it's very interesting, the sort of like responses I get when I ask that question of, how do you feel about like where you resonate to?
Yeah. I think that's so interesting though, because you said something that I used to have a different perspective on. And then I was having a conversation with someone.
Yeah.
And I was talking about, I think, my experience in different countries in the world. And I was speaking about diversity. It was with a Taiwanese friend.
Okay.
And he says, you know, most of the world is homogeneous. And for some reason, when he said that, it was a reminder, right? We all have some certain moments that are like self-checks, right? And reminders.
Yeah.
And it's like, I think my head had been so down and focused on, I think because of my lived experience in the United States as a Black American, right? We're fighting perpetually to be seen, heard, respected, you know what I mean? Understood and valued for who we are.
Yeah.
That, again, that was my perspective. And that is like, you know, that is a properly placed perspective. But that moment was important because I think it was a catalyst for me in being like, okay, it's actually an ode to how powerful media is now, and that we're blessed to live in a time where we have a tool, right? So the biggest opportunity like there is that's, which is reality. Once you think about it, most of the world, most people's lived experiences actually are homogeneous.
Yeah.
And so when you talk about like Denmark, or we talk about creating community anywhere, it's like, okay, letting anyone know anywhere where not only there's a myriad of lived experiences, but hey, how do we create safe environments for everyone to not only believe what they believe, but be open to other perspectives, open to other ideas, and most importantly, ensure that our perspective and our ideas aren't actively harming or limiting someone else's perspective or their lived experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so earlier you had, actually, I don't think you mentioned it, but you had sort of just gone over your family and your friends and you moving. And what has been sort of the reaction or reception initially when you were gonna go on remote year, but also now that you're living this, I guess, nomadic life? I don't know if you're like settled somewhere now, but this journey of building extended family, what has that reaction or response been like from the people closest to you?
Absolutely. So to answer the question within the question, no, I currently don't have a home base.
Yeah.
I currently live in places for about 6 to 12 weeks at a time.
Okay.
However, this year,
yeah,
I focus most of my time in Nairobi because of some of the things that we're building with extended family.
Okay.
But to answer the broader question, you know, there's been a myriad of responses, right? Initially, from family, it was confusion, right? Like, what? What are you doing? Why are you doing it? Why are you doing it so young in your legal career? You just got things going in a solid direction. Why would you do that? From mentors, it was you're committing career suicide. From a super minority of mentors, it was great.
Yeah.
Do it right now. Because everyone that's similarly situated, that is in your profession, that's my age, they're all hated, or they're all trying to pivot, or they're all trying to figure out now what life means.
Yeah.
They're like, take it now. And that, that was years ago. I think, the perspectives have naturally evolved. I think it's been interesting. Sometimes it can be out of sight, out of mind, right? Initially, I think that was my experience. Initially, it was, okay, if I'm not present in people's faces, it's not that they don't value me, but people really believed from an American perspective that, if you're away, you're inaccessible, right? That's a different time in technology. We're 7 years.
Yeah.
But I think that can still be, a practice sometimes. People can be like, if you're not around, you're not accessible. For some reason, it's too much of a hurdle for people to look up a time zone on their world clock. You know what I mean? You'll get calls at 3 a.m. So there's some of that. But again, I think over time, things have evolved, right? And I think how I've contributed to like changing that perspective is understanding that, hey, my experience is unique. My life is, I guess, atypical. And so, I also have a part to play in the responsibility of like, hey guys, I'm still here. I'm still just as present for you as I want you to be for me. Yeah. Our relationship hasn't changed. I still love you the same. You have to be a little bit more strategic with like how you schedule communication maybe, but I'm the same person. I might not live 3 hours away now. Now I might live 7, 8 hours away or 10 hours away or sometimes 16 hours away. Yeah. But I still value our relationships the same. So I guess it's from a relationship perspective, and with respect to like my parents and like it going from an idea of being like, oh, this is crazy. You're just doing this to be rebellious, or this is like an irresponsible decision. I'm blessed to have parents that are able to come see me. And so during that first year, they came to see me my third month in Portugal. And then to close out that year, not the year of travel, but that calendar year, my parents and my brother came to see me for Christmas. Nice. And so that was the first seeds planted of them being able to see like, hey, this is what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And now years down the line, after I've had my own practice, went back in-house, did all the things that would be traditionally known as like successful, made the money that is aligned with success for them, right? Now that I've kind of, you opened that door and it's like, hey guys, I can do this. Now it's like, okay, I understand. And now it's more a concern about happiness and safety. So the conversation is transitioned from, this is crazy, why are you doing it? To my mom being like, are you lonely out there? When you gonna find somebody?
That's always moms, isn't it?
But it's interesting. She never was like that. Now it's like, yeah, I just want to make sure you okay out there. You always, by yourself. So conversations have definitely evolved, and it's a lot more normalized now. Now, but sometimes my mom does when she wants me to come home, and I'm actually going home a few days. What she does is she encourages my nephews. They taught them. One of them they're 3 and 2. One of them would be 4 in a couple months, and she now encourages them. And she says, I can hear her whispering, and now they know. Every time they get on the phone, T, where you at? When you coming home? T, where you at?
And it's so difficult to like turn down like a little adorable thing, Yeah. So
that's funny. But that's how the sentiments have evolved over the years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I wanted to talk a bit about like community and community building. But before that, have there been times where you've traveled somewhere and you felt like an outsider? And how does that sort of impact how you move forward from there with interacting with people? Or do you just, let it roll off your shoulder and, it doesn't?
You're asking all the right questions today. I think, honestly, I think that feeling is part and parcel to the travel experience in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
At some point, you're going to come into a situation where you feel like, oh, I'm an outsider. And I think that's a great exercise.
Yeah.
Because, and it's so funny, I have a funny relationship with friction. I love it.
Okay.
I think it's great. Even when I am uncomfortable.
You're comfortable in the uncomfortable?
No, well, what I realize is, because honestly, what I realize is it's an opportunity, right? I'm comfortable in that experience, even if I'm uncomfortable, because it's like, okay, all right, time to do some self-reflection, time to, do some analysis on how I'm feeling, what am I feeling, and how do I approach this situation, experience, or environment to not only have a more positive experience, but to get what I want out of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've had experiences where I've felt like an outsider. Sometimes that can just be simply culturally.
Yeah.
Sometimes that can be a community-based experience as you're on this journey defining your people, right? And so what I've done consistently is develop a deeper relationship with my process of self-checking, self-reflecting. Okay, well, how did I experience that? Why did I experience that? And one thing they always say about travel is you can't run from yourself. And we
really
always
can't.
have things about us that, we can improve upon.
Yeah.
And those things are illuminated most when you're in environments where nobody knows you.
Yeah.
And you no longer have the context or to be able to say, they feel that way because of this, or they feel that way because of this. When you extract yourself from all stimuli that you're familiar with and that people that know you, the only thing you're left with is be like, oh, I'm experiencing that again. So that must mean there's something in some way I'm contributing to this experience.
Yeah.
How do I adjust or evolve in this space?
And also, I would add, when you're removing the mask, like sometimes I think as people, we sometimes show up differently with different people, whether it's with your family, your friends, your coworkers, there's always different parts of you that are amplified and whatever.
Right.
But when you're traveling, I think because of the unexpected, being in a new place, sometimes there isn't that reference point. Who am I showing up as? So a lot of the times it's just you being you. Or because you're by yourself for extended periods of time, it's kind of like what happened to people like during the lockdowns in 2020. Now you have to like sit with yourself in silence, and you have to just deal with whatever you reveal about yourself.
You're required to develop a deeper sense of self, a better relationship with yourself, and you're required to figure out what that all means if you don't know what that means. So like you said, when you don't maybe have those reference points it sounds, because some people do, your personality may adjust because you feel comfortable in that space, but when you don't have those reference points, it's like, ooh, how do I show up? So that's super. Yeah.
And so with all of this that you've been working on, what has community always been to you? Because I think that we all have different definitions of what community is and experiences. What has community meant to you throughout your life? And how has building extended family or what has it taught you about it?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think building extended family has taught me that defining community is an ongoing exercise that I don't think has a finite end. We build community in a myriad of ways. So I actually think it's incumbent upon all of us to continue answering the question of what community means. It can be as simple as these are the people that I eat lunch with every day at school.
Yeah.
It can be, these are the people that I commune with at church or in the mosque. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It can be, these are the people that I love having sports conversations about. These are the people that I argue who the GOAT is.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Always.
Like, these are the people that I eat with. These are the people that I cook with. Like, we can go through this exercise forever. But I think the commonality is spaces where we feel comfortable to engage with like minds. And it's very broad.
Yeah.
But I think that is, that is the entry point of community, and it can become more nuanced as you narrow down on the subject and or topic. Yeah.
And what's been the most challenging part of building community from a people point of view? Because I'm sure with like the tech side of things now, that has its own challenges. But what's been most challenging about sort of the essence of community and answering these questions while building this platform?
I think that's a great question. I think the answer that I'm thinking and pondering on, the reason that I'm pausing is because I think it's simple, right? And maybe I'm trying to find a nugget that's a little more nuanced than this, but it's the process of seeking to understand, seeking to be understood, and finding the place that within that you can inspire someone to come to the table. Right? Come to the table, meaning like there's a lot of relationship building that's organic. And actually most of it in our everyday lives is just organic. You're not really walking around and saying like, I need this type of friend. I had an interesting conversation with a gentleman that I traveled with in South Africa. He's half Afrikaans and half English.
Okay.
And, we talked about his lived experience, and he was saying like, hey, I hadn't interacted with anyone, that was Black on a peer level until I was in college.
Is this the conversation that was on the Extended Family YouTube channel? Yeah.
And it's important because again, we're all evolving in from our lived experiences, and I'm getting to you. And when he said that, what he said is, I'm sorry, I didn't even get to it. What he said is, I hadn't had this experience, and now that my perspective is entirely different, I still have a myriad of an intersection of community, and I'm interested in growing in these ways. I'm interested in having more interactions and friendships, but what am I supposed to do? Walk on the street and be like, hey, yo, Black dude, I want to be your friend.
Right.
No, that was important for him to say at the moment, even for me to hear, because I'm like, you know what, that's real, right? I can't hold that against you, right? Now, do we have a responsibility to put ourselves in different situations and be intentional in different ways? Yes. But how do you do that if you don't know where those spaces are?
Fair. Right.
And that's what I'm trying to create and solve for with Extended Family, right? Creating, any business is about reducing the friction to which you can gain a desired result, right? Whether that be any product, surface, or good, right? Everybody needs glass for their house.
Right.
Everybody's not going to go create glass. You know what I mean? And so the struggle or the process, the toiling, the building is doing the thing that is all difficult for us to do in everyday life.
Yeah.
Right? So the most difficult thing is changing that almost completely and inherently organic experience to something and creating infrastructure around it. Yeah. Right? Because you're no longer, now I am the guy. I am going out in the street proverbially and saying, hey, guy,
let's have a
conversation. I want
you
to be my friend. You know what I mean? And so maintaining the authenticity while being intentional when you're dealing, again, with an inherently organic experience, that's been the biggest challenge thus far.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what advice would you give someone that wants to be able to build sort of a community of their own from their passions, or they might feel like they have certain strengths that they can help other people with, what advice would you give them? What are some of the lessons that you've learned from this experience that can sort of be universal in anyone trying to create community?
Yeah. I think I'm going to start with the most obvious thing is that, as I mentioned earlier, we're blessed to live in a time where we have so many technological tools, right?
Yeah.
And we have the biggest search engine on the world, which is YouTube, right? It's not Google, you know what I mean? We got YouTube, we have TikTok, and those I think are the beginning grounds of the beginning spaces of our research and engagement, right? Finding those interest groups on those platforms, say like, hey, there are people that stream Roblox all day, or there are people that specifically are interested in 10,000 piece puzzles. And I'm being very nuanced on purpose because, the experiment and the evolution of the internet have taught us and given us so much more access to those. So I would say start with online interest groups, and then the next step would be, from that, from my legal background, your research funnel starts wide and then it goes narrow. Figuring out if there are in-person, manifestations of those interest groups in your geographic location, right? If you like swimming, is there a swimmers club? And again, this might sound really simple and Fisher Price to some people. That's so funny. Even our references, I'm sorry, quick caveat, I do this sometimes. Even our references can be super local. I just made a reference to a brand to denote like elementary and basic. Yeah. But that brand, I feel like is American. Did you guys have Fisher Price?
No, but I know of it. I think also the influences from other people. So I have cousins that are American, and friends that are American as well.
Okay,
but yeah, you are right. That sometimes we'll say things that like won't translate. But yes, for the people that don't know,
Fisher Price was growing up was a kid's toy brand, basically.
Yeah.
But the point was that although this may sound like super simple to some people, hopefully this is something that's just super practical.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we can overcomplicate practical steps in our lives. Like for me, and there's a lot of reasons that we overcomplicate things.
Yeah.
As a result of our programming, whatever that may be. But I hope that, taking the approach of honestly just finding things that you're interested in and think are cool based on your interests, from YouTube, TikTok, Google, honestly, ChatGPT and the AI resources are actually super great resources because what they do is they allow you to engage in a way where you can ask it specific questions and you can figure out the full scope or infrastructure or building blocks around whatever you're interested in,
Yeah.
So
I would also add, and this is one that I've struggled with, sometimes when you're trying to build something or start something, perfectionism can hold you back.
For sure.
And so I always tell people that, like, if you're beginning anything, it's never going to be in its perfect form from day one.
For sure.
And so it's really important to also just start. I mean, of course, do your research, have a plan, all of those things. But some people don't even start. You know,
it's so interesting. I was having a conversation about that last night. And that's actually something I intimately struggle with. And that's a challenge for me. But it's just so crazy how timely your reference is there, because I was having a conversation with someone that say, sometimes we understand ideas, or sometimes we have, there's people online that teach certain ideas or concepts, and they abstract all these concepts and they say, all you have to do is this, right? But all of our programming, meaning who you and I are today, is based on context, right? And nothing can be devoid of that context.
Yeah.
So the truth, right, objectively, is that all you have to do is just start. the reality is that we all have certain context and programming to overcome. I can acknowledge simultaneously that, yeah, I mean, I should be doing it in this way. This is the way to progress, right? Progress over perfection, right? But the first step is really understanding your context. And it's like, how do I overcome my programming? How do I unlearn my programming to get to that objective truth? To me, that's the first step.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm in the process of overcoming my perfectionism, which does inhibit progress, admittedly.
It really does.
But I just thought that was important context and so timely.
It is.
Yeah.
It definitely is. And I think what we had mentioned earlier about, being able to sit with yourself and understanding who you are and understanding all of the complexities and how like your past has influenced who you are today and the things that you might have to unlearn about yourself and the world, and that type of education on oneself and self-awareness and reflection, that's also really important in this step of getting over that perfectionism. Because a lot of the times, perfectionism might be deep-rooted it stems from something else.
Exactly.
It's not just that, we want things to be perfect and, that we're sort of like OCD about things.
Right.
A lot of the times it's tied to something else.
Absolutely.
Or at least that's what I have found in my case when I'm constantly trying to like work through it and things like that. So I think this is, my last question for you.
Oh no. Yeah. We done already.
How long has it been?
No.
But what is your hope for extended family?
Look at you. So my hope for extended family is that we become the catalyst for creating infrastructure for a more globalized society, right? And safe spaces for people to engage within that framework. As the arc towards globalization accelerates, people will be seeking tools, tips, tricks, infrastructure, and most importantly, community to engage in that environment. And I'd love for extended family not only to be the catalyst for that, but to be the North Star of what it means to engage meaningfully, cross-culturally around the world.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Brandon, thank you for joining me on the Connect. Thank you for sharing. I know that we sort of went through extended family, but then also your personal experiences and feelings and opinions on things. I'm sure the listeners have been enjoying this, or at least I hope so. And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us today. All of the relevant links to where you can find extended family and Brandon are going to be in the show notes, in the descriptions. And is there anything that you want to say before?
Yes, I want to try to say your name in the way that exactly you say it. So it's Qali. Qali.
Close.
Come on, man. I got to get this. Qali.
You're doing more of like a hard G, and it needs to come from like your tonsil. Like it's a GH.
I feel like I'm okay.
Qali. Close.
Qali.
Yeah, we're going to work on it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to say your name first, and I was like, no, we got to get this practice in. So, because actually, that's an entirely different conversation about how important that is.
Yeah.
To
language and names.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I want to say thank you so much for having me today. Thank you for thinking of me. Thank you for creating a situation where you and I could kind of have this conversation. This is my first actually on the other side of the microphone. So I really appreciate it. And I look forward to staying connected.
Definitely.
And thank you again.
All right. Thank you. And to the listeners, thank you again. And I'll speak to you all next week. Bye.
If you've made it this far, I want to thank you for listening to this week's conversation. Here, we believe the best in humanity is realized when we learn from and embrace the differences in each other. That makes us a little more open-minded, more inspired by the people in the world around us, and a step closer towards building that ever-growing extended family.